I went into Georgia Tech. I used to be on campus and I wanted a quiet place to learn. I wanted like a makom kvua. And so I had the bright idea of trying to start a lab because I know labs are given rooms and therefore a room means I can have a space to learn. And so I went to, there's a lab at Georgia Tech called DILAC, which is like digital humanities. And I went to them and I pitched this idea that Sefaria, a very common Jewish tool, doesn't have tzurat hadaf. And I went to them and I said, hey, if you give me a little place, a little room, I'll make tzurat hadaf and we'll write a research paper on it and it'll be great. And I managed to convince the head of that lab that this was a great idea. I also got Sefaria to fund it. And therefore I made a Talmud lab in the middle of Georgia Tech with no Jews. And that gave me a place to learn.
In my experience, this whole notion of like transitioning your career or like reinventing yourself is largely something that happens between your ears. Like people think, again, I don't take this the wrong way, but I think that people care less about you than you think they do. And so this whole like self-perception of like, oh, my LinkedIn profile says X and now it's going to have to say Y. At the end of the day, it's all fluff and games.
I was working at a company once and there were some people from different levels, and some people, we went to a conference and some people took off their kippahs and some people kept it on. And was one guy kept on his kippah and wouldn't shake any woman's hand. And the other people, some of them, they took off their kippahs and they were shaking women's hands. A non-Jewish colleague of ours said to me, like, what's wrong with these people that they give up their values just because they go on a conference?
Connections are real. People get hired based on making a connection with other people. It's very rare, and probably a bad hiring decision if you get hired because all your skills are right on paper, but you don't click with the other people in the firm. Probably not going to work out long term.
You have protexia in this country.
Right. Well, protexia can only get you so far, but you really do have to make connections with other people.
Shalom Aleichem and welcome to Shtark Tank. Shtark Tank is a podcast about the challenges and opportunities of being a mentor in the workforce. For those who are listening on Spotify or watching and are unfamiliar with this location, we are here in Yeshiva University Israel in Beit Vagan with the interns on the YU Summer Internship Program. So it's really great to be here. And a big thank you to Stephanie and to Gabi for arranging this collaboration. So it's really great to be here. Today, we're going to be talking about new beginnings and transitions. And we have three very special panelists here. To my left, we have Rabbi Reuven Berman. He is a rebbe, a business owner, and a CEO of Kobe IP. So welcome, Reuven. We also have my good friend, Zevi Reinitz. Zevi is a founder, a marketing executive, and the author of 14 Sefarim. And finally, we have Moshe Rapps. Moshe is a client advisor at Bernstein Private Wealth Management. He's also a paramedic, a podcaster, and a baseball coach. So we're going to talk, as I mentioned, about beginnings. And I'm wondering if each of our guests could each share one story, an anecdote, a lesson you learned from starting off a new beginning, a new transition that you found it to be useful and valuable in terms of helping others navigate their new beginnings and their new transitions. Reuven, you got the magic seat. Why don't we start with you?
Okay, the magic seat. Okay, welcome everybody to Israel. Very exciting summer program for you guys. Transition. So I don't have anything major, I think, in transition. Maybe other people have more exciting things to say, but I think for me, something that was challenging and that you guys might be able to relate to is I went to MTA, I went to Israel for 2 years, I went to YU, and I was in YU Smicha. So very much in kind of one type of environment. My transition happened later. I actually learned and got Smicha at YU, and then started teaching. I made Aliyah and started teaching in Israel, only to realize that wasn't enough for me to support my family. Other people have different situations, but it didn't work. And I moved into the workplace. And one of the things that I found challenging was that, and even though I was in a pretty, kind of from similar type of workplace, but the language you use, the type of interactions is different than like your friends in yeshiva or seminary or stern, that you were kind of used to a certain way of interaction, a way of speaking. And here speaking maybe even more so to the guys, but a little more in like a base midrash talk of kind of fighting out with chavrusas. And in the workplace, there's a certain professional type of communication that definitely took me some time to learn and how to understand when's the right time to speak up and know your place. And it wasn't only in the beginning. It's actually, it just takes time to understand the dynamics in the workplace. So that was something that was a challenge at the beginning and was a challenge for some time. Now I'm running my own company. So it's, I guess, in some ways a little easier. That's other challenges with managing people and how to communicate with them. But I would say that understanding your place and communicating with other people that you're working with is definitely a challenge in transition.
Yes. First of all, nice to see everybody. Welcome. Good luck. You're all here as interns for the summer. Okay. Hatzlacha Rabba with that. I guess I've had Rue's story is a little more exciting than mine. I was kind of like more on the traditional tech track from the beginning, so I was never like a big Rav or Mechanech or anything like that. But I think that for me, one of the realizations looking backwards is that really you're always in a state of transition, no matter where you're holding, no matter what you're doing. Certainly, like there are certain points in your life which are, it's more explicit. So if you're leaving high school to yeshiva or seminary, if you're going from yeshiva or seminary to college or to work or whatever it is, you're always going to be in a state of transition. I think that when we're younger, we might realize this intellectually, but we don't necessarily internalize this, and we're not ready for that kind of jarring, actual transition in real life. And this for me, it came up. I'll tell you two quick examples of where this came up for me. Perhaps most recently, I'm now also running my own business, but in a previous startup that I was in, I went to a startup that was in the heart of Tel Aviv with people very, very different from myself, outwardly, inwardly, and the ability to transition to that environment and to create real relationships. I mean, that took a little bit of you have to realize that on the one hand, people tell you that you should be true to yourself and be true to your values. And that's always very, very true. But you sometimes also forget the other side of that, which is you have to condition yourself to be confident with your roots, but also kind and out there and expressive and be able to create real relationships. And that's something which took me a little bit of time to really internalize, certainly in the startup in Tel Aviv, where everything from politics to religion to the way we look to how many tattoos you do or don't have. I was different from these people in many, many ways. And I'll just tell you one quick vignette to round it out, more on the being true to yourself side of things. My very first business trip, this is now going back a long time, the very first business trip that I ever took for a tech company on my own. So in other words, I was traveling with groups of people, but the first responsible trip that I had to take was to a very large, publicly traded company in England. We had a large account there, and it came out after Pesach. It was during Sfiras Omer, and my minhag is not to shave during Sfiras Omer, so my beard was, good and full. And I was very concerned that, this is my first impression. I'm going to have to go be, big fancy corporate. Maybe I should shave. Maybe I should. And I was really, really nervous about what to do. I consulted with some people. In the end, I opted to shave. I got someone told me I should be making, and I shaved. And I walked into the room, this big conference room with a lot of people, goyim, everybody, no one there was Jewish. No one there had anything to do with Judaism. And the funny thing was that I was all dressed up and fancy and ready to very tight, all tense about whether or not I was making the right decision. Every single person there was in ripped jeans and a t-shirt and had the grungy beards. And if I would have had my spirit beard, not only I would have looked better than them, and I would have fit in probably better than with my suit jacket or whatever. So I guess the point is, keep this balance. Be true to yourself. Don't worry about it. Don't hold it so tightly. And even while being true to yourself, I think continue to be open to creating real relationships and being open to other people's points of view. That's always going to be a win-win combo.
Nice to see everybody. It's very humbling to be on this panel with two individuals that I personally look up to as role models. I've learned a lot from both of you over the years, whether you know it or not, from listening to your podcasts and on Shtark Tank and other platforms. So first of all, I actually think that's a funny story. I had a similar experience with that when I was interviewing for my job, where I'm currently still at the same firm at Bernstein, but I was interviewing back in 2016, and it wasn't during Sira, but I had a beard, and my now boss told me, when you're interviewing with this senior manager in New York over Zoom, you probably should shave, be presentable. So I didn't love it, but I shaved, and then I got on the Zoom, and of course he had a full beard, so I share that experience as well. But when thinking about transition, so I think for me, when I started working more in the corporate world, for me, the hardest transition was keeping my learning schedule consistent. I think the hardest lesson that I learned was that if I wasn't in a proper framework, then my learning would suffer. So for example, when I first, really was working the first few years, at a chavrusa, we would learn at nights, but it was, one night he wasn't feeling well. One night my kids had something, we had a wedding. It just sort of fell by the wayside. And when I look back on it, I realized there were so many chunks of time when I could have been learning seriously that I wasn't. And when we were learning, it was great. But the problem was those days in between. And for me, I needed that framework. So for me, I found Daf Yomi, and been doing it since day one of this cycle, and it's been fantastic for me. That's not the only framework that exists. There's more physical frameworks, and there are frameworks like the Yomis that exist. But for me, that was something very, very important to realize, that as I was transitioning sort of out of I learned here in the Kola, as I was transitioning out of full-time learning more towards the working world, that I needed to put those structures in place to keep myself focused and balanced and ensure that I would be learning at as high a level as I could every single day.
So it's interesting that two of you guys jumped to sort of the next topic, which I wanted to ask you, which is about culture, cross-culture, relationships, community at work, community beyond work, balancing all those things together. And especially when we talk about, students who are here from America, interning in Israel, Olim, potential Olim, global business culture where you're doing deals and having clients and relationships all across the world, across different cultures. These things are all very challenging. So what other things have you guys found to be most helpful and most valuable in sort of creating that community, creating those relationships, but also, not allowing it to get to your head in the sense of you're a Bentorah, you're different than these people, but you're also in a shared boat on the business sense. So how do you guys navigate all those cross-cultural dilemmas?
So I think that it's, to Zevi's point, we're always in a state of transition, and there are different experiences that you're always going through, no matter what point you're at in your life. For me, dealing with the cultural differences has sort of been, taking different forms. So what that means is, when I made Aliyah, that took the form of trying to just figure out how to navigate in the Israeli bureaucracy. Actually, we're still trying to do that from time to time. In terms of in the working world, so I work at a wealth management firm, Bernstein Private Wealth Management. We have a very large global presence, but our presence in Israel is pretty small. It's only 4 people in the office. It happens to be that we're all men, and 3 of us wear kippas. Whether, I think that was by chance. I don't know. But the point is that for me, it's sort of a very comfortable environment in my Dalet Amos within the workforce. But then when branching out, when meeting with clients, we meet with all different types of clients. A lot of the people that Zevi was talking about, people that have radically different backgrounds, who look different, who think different. And it is challenging to be able to connect with them on a level that is, meeting them where they are. But that's part of the opportunity as well, to learn from experiences, from meeting with different types of people, from hearing what resonates with others. So I don't know if there's a magic bullet answer of figuring out how to deal with the different types of cultural challenges. But number one, being aware that people value things different than you do, and not everyone sees eye to eye with you, but being open to hearing other perspectives, giving them the space to speak and express themselves, and then finding common ground to connect with. I was on a call today with somebody, we connected over sports. Sports is the best connection point. In Israel, it's a little harder unless you really love soccer. You can get lucky sometimes with NBA, but certainly if you can find some common ground to connect with, that, there are certain things like sports which transcend all types of cultural and religious lines. And so finding those little nuggets is a really, really important thing to do.
So first of all, just if you're ever on a panel, always choose the middle seat, because then you can bounce off of what was said before. Yeah, I actually do have I do have a silver bullet, I do believe. And that is, it's kind of echoing what I said before.
That's what I learned from.
Which is, I really do think that, to me, in my mind, the key to navigating almost any situation is going to boil down to some combination of, call it whatever you want, menschlichkeit or kindness or positivity. There's a big difference between, doing what your colleagues are doing, or what, you're, just going with their flow. That's something which is, compromising on your own internal values. That's very different than being, outwardly positive or being a mensch and being kind. I have found that by far the number one thing that has helped navigate situations, corporate situations, personal situations, in anything that has to do with the working world that doesn't, jive with my core values, is always going to boil down to just building a consistent rapport with people, being a mensch. People know that I care about them, that I care about their families if they have families. If they have a dog, I care about their dog. If they care about what... If you just show that, I see you as a person and I respect you as a person, and I don't have to insist that they respect me because, it's a mission in Pirkei Avos, but that if you respect other people, people will ultimately, if you show them genuine respect, they'll respect you as well. And I have found that to be, again, to a surprising level, to the point where I had a senior tech executive in Tel Aviv confide in me that he used to go to shul with his father when he was growing up, and he wishes he had more time to study Gemara, and maybe we could like go over some things together. And these were things which blew my mind. I never once spoke to him about religion. I just showed up to work every day with a smile and a yarmulke, and he knew that I was Shomer Shabbos and Shomer Kashrus. And he probably saw one or two of Yaakov's LinkedIn posts, talking about how I've written a few Sefarim. So I think to me, it's like not thinking so hard about it and just staying true, again, not just to yourself and your values. That's always, always important. And there are always going to be these situations. I've had, just parenthetic, like one really interesting shadow that I had one time was where I was working in an office with a group of people who were not, as far as I knew, were not keeping kosher, but they very much wanted to eat lunch together. That was like a big thing. And it was like, where are we ordering from today? Where are we going today? And there was one particular person who wanted to go out to lunch with me. And he said, oh, I want to go out to this chicken place in Tel Aviv. And I didn't have a lot of time to like figure out like what's the story. I did a quick, smooth research to see is this place that's even kosher on any level, is what's going on. And because he said to me, he's like, if you're not going to go there, I'm just going to go order the whatever cheeseburger, downstairs or whatever I'm going to get. So obviously I wanted him to go have kosher food. It was available. And I quickly looked and I saw it was a questionable hashgacha, at least by my standards. It was not something that I would typically go. And I had to figure out on the fly, what do I do in that situation? Do I agree to go with him to a hashgacha that's questionable and make sure that he's eating something which is questionably kosher? Or do I say no and eat by myself and have this person, Vada, eat the cheeseburger? And so I resorted to my silver bullet of kindness and compassion. I went with him. We could talk about exactly what I did. I consulted with Rabbi Reuven afterwards to confirm that my decision was correct. But either way, at the end of the day, kindness, compassion, and not just thinking about yourself and your values only, but also looking at the other person and respecting them as what they are.
Most of what I was going to say was said along the way. I was nodding along, and definitely kindness, compassion. In general, in interpersonal matters, when you work on yourself and you work on your own midos, that's really kind of the key towards success in interpersonal matters. And mitzvah, one day you get married and you have children, and in those relationships also, when you've been able to work on your own patience and your own care and concern for other people, that will go a very long way towards all these things. So I think absolutely agree with what Zevi was saying in terms of treating people like a mensch, consistency, honesty, all these core values that we have, core midos, core characteristics really help break all boundaries. And I think that we're in a world, and I'm not talking about, woke secular campuses. I don't know what's going on there. It seems a little crazy, but I think in most of the world is still normal, thank God. And when you're true to yourself, and people say, again, you're consistent and you're honest and you're kind and you're caring, so they will respect your way of life. And I had a story. I was working at a company once, and there were some people from different levels, and some people, we went to a conference, and some people took off their kippahs and some people kept it on. And was one guy kept on his kippah and wouldn't shake any woman's hand, and the other people, some of them, they took off their kippahs and they were shaking women's hands. I'm not addressing the question of shaking hand, but a non-Jewish colleague of ours said to me, like, what's wrong with these people that they give up their values just because they go on a conference? And she was very respectful of the person who's consistent and says, okay, I'm going to wear my kippah and I'm not going to shake the women's hands. And that was actually eye-opening to me. And I think and again, the question of what to on the spot, and I've heard poskim differentiate between like an ongoing relationship with someone where you're going to see them all the time. So you have to establish kind of what the dynamic is versus a one-time meeting and it's on the spot all of a sudden you're going to embarrass them. I'm not at all giving any type of halachic ruling on this, but the point is that thinking about, the combination of being a mensch while also being true and consistent to who you are is the key to navigating these challenges.
So when we talk about transitions and new beginnings, so, some people, a little older than the people sitting in this room are now scared or actively being laid off, cut down because of vast changes that are going on in the workforce, technology and AI and all these things. And it can be obviously scary, especially if your parnasa is on the line. So I'm wondering if you guys have any perspectives on transitioning later in life or having a transition mindset, which Zevi, you already alluded to, and also sort of balancing that fear of I need to keep up, I need to change, with some consistency, building on your previous skills and experiences, and trying to create some sort of balance of being aware of the fact the world is changing very quickly, but also, doesn't necessarily mean and not necessarily healthy or correct to just throw out everything and I'm going to go take an AI booster course and rebuild my everything because AI is destroying everything I've ever done up until now. So Zevi, you jinxed it. We're going to start with you.
Yeah, no, that's a quick, okay. I spoke too soon. That was a question that could go in a lot of different ways. I think that I would say two things. Number one is this whole notion of like transition. I mean, specifically in the context of AI, you're talking like to kind of reinvent yourself or to, I mean, the chevra in the room, is just now kind of developing their careers. You're really at the advantage that you're building yourselves with. As AI trends upwards, your careers will grow and increase with that. So you're kind of like you don't have to shift from a previous career track. But I guess I would say broadly speaking is that, in my opinion, in my experience, this whole notion of like transitioning your career or like reinventing yourself is largely something that happens between your ears. Like people think, again, I don't take this the wrong way, but I think that people care less about you than you think they do. And so this whole like self-perception of like, oh, my LinkedIn profile says X and now it's going to have to say Y. At the end of the day, it's all fluff and games. And, a person is out there not to lie, God forbid, not to be dishonest, but things today are moving very quickly and rapidly, and the ability to like reposition yourself or to say tomorrow that you had this idea and you spoke to your guy, and now you're a founder of a startup and you can do that in an hour. Like you can do whatever you want and you can call yourself whatever you want. And so this whole notion of like, the first point is don't hold it so tightly. You can transition between a million things and you can reinvent yourself if that's what you want to call it. People do it. People are always doing it. The people who are, I think, the most successful are the people that realize that they have to continually adapt, even within their own company. Like who wants to just be the same as they were 20 years ago? Like, so be open to that and don't hold that notion so tightly. And the second thing I would say on a more practical level is that specifically with AI or any discipline that you're like, feel like you're less qualified or less versed in, I would say as quickly as possible, get to a point where you're actually becoming the teacher in a sense. In other words, even though you don't know anything about it, if you don't know anything about AI, so then find a way, I don't know, even if it's starting a blog for yourself, I don't know, find a way to take the inputs and to force yourself to be, expressing them in some sort of authoritative, kind of teachable way, tell people about it. Hey, I just found this resource. Hey, I just found this thing, the more that you can frame it as like, I'm already there, I'm already an authority who's moving and progressing in this area, whatever that area is, the easier it will be, I think, to progress, and you won't feel like you're always behind the eight ball.
To jump on what Zevi was saying, he actually took what I was thinking a step further, which is certainly to always be curious and learning and grow and whatever, like you said, in the company you're working in, the industry you're working in, and then expanding your knowledge base. Don't sit still in terms of your understanding and your knowledge. I think that's an important characteristic. Zevi's taking it a step further, which is to put yourself in a position to express that to others, or even to yourself, to say it out loud. Definitely helps in both your understanding and in positioning yourself moving forward. And the other thing I'd say is also piggybacking off what you were saying, the fluff is fluff, but the relationships, the networking that you can do, the relationships you can develop, those are real. And it starts here. There's a great opportunity to develop these relationships, like maintain these relationships moving forward, continue to have conversations as you evolve in life. And, Zevi and I have had a lot of conversations with each other, with friends who are going, seeking out new opportunities as life goes on. What can be gained from those relationships is very powerful and valuable. And so I would, begin to nurture those, realize that not only in the short term is it good to have friendships, that's a wonderful thing, but on a professional level, it's something that can be very helpful moving down the line.
Yeah, very much was going to echo that point as well. First of all, I do want to make one correction. I forgot before. I'm not a paramedic. I'm an EMT. So any paramedics listening out there, don't come after me. There's a big difference. Yeah, look, there's a very, very big debate going on right now. I'm sure you're all aware of it. Is the future of AI, does that mean there are going to be less jobs for people, or that we need more jobs for people? It depends who you ask. AI is taking all the jobs, we're not going to have anything to do, or there's going to be so many new jobs that are going to be created that we can't even think of right now. And we've seen this type of question asked in the past. We've seen these trends happen before. Usually it comes out like the second side of the argument, that there are more jobs created that we don't even know will exist yet. Whether that'll be true or not in the future, who knows? But I think that, number one, there are a lot of skills that are transferable to other types of roles. So to Zevi's point, don't box yourself in a mindset of I can only do one thing because I'm really good at this particular role. Well, you may have skills that are transferable to other types of roles with a little bit of out of the box thinking, a little bit of adaptation, and a little bit of guidance from people that are in your life or in those fields. And the second is, to Ruth's point, is that connections are real. People get hired based on making a connection with other people. It's very rare, and probably a bad hiring decision if you get hired because all your skills are right on paper, but you don't click with the other people in the firm. Probably not going to work out long term.
You have protexia in this country.
Right. Well, protexia can only get you so far, but you really do have to make connections with other people. So to Rue's point, don't sleep on that side of it. Continue building those personal friendships, professional relationships. Be curious and inquisitive about what types of opportunities are out there. And those relationships are the things that are ultimately going to lead to future employment.
Okay, I just had one last point. That last point about the relationships, I think, is so important. Just to triple underscore it, is I've gone as far as to maintain relationships with people who have let me go, with people who have interviewed me and not hired me. I have relationships long afterwards, deliberately, exactly for this reason. Not because I have any ulterior motive, but because the more that if you connect with somebody and you develop these relationships, you have no idea how this can help you, progress in the future, and very, very, very important, no matter where you're transitioning to.
And I'll just say on that as well. So I started my own company a year and a half ago, and I have hired one full-time person and two part-time people. They're all people I worked with previously. Two of the three, I maintained a relationship after leaving the previous company. Just kind of staying in contact. What are you doing? What are you up to? And when I was in a position to hire and looking to hire people, I had trusted them. I knew they would work well, and thank God it's been going great. So again, it's not exactly about getting a job, but the point is you see how important these relationships can be.
So we'll take some questions, guys. Audience, we'll batch 3 or 4 questions together, and then we'll open up to the floor as well. So just to repeat for the camera, we had a question about balancing quality and quantity in networking. We had networking in a new country like Israel when you have 0 to start with. And we also had maybe jumping ship and starting a new company. So maybe we'll have some final thoughts from you guys on these issues. Who wants to start?
Well, I want to say about networking. I met Zevi in our neighborhood here in Israel after I made Aliyah, or just before I made Aliyah. I actually knew his brother before, but we didn't know each other. We had a lot of mutual connections, but we didn't know each other before, and we become good friends. So, I think we're an amazing people. We have amazing communities, and tap into wherever you live, whatever community you're part of. Tap into those relationships, and that's someone answers the question, your question, which is, yeah, I don't know. I haven't really done like the wide net type of networking. I think it just, as the Gemara says, chavra islay, that we're internet connected community. People have friends who know other people. I just introduced a friend of mine to Zevi, and they hit it off. And that guy was also a chavrusa of Moshe's back in the day. I'll tell you about it after Moshe. But it's just that we are a very well connected community, thank God. And YU, I remember when I was in college and people were talking about YU versus secular college. Everyone here is in YU as undergrads, really? Okay. So anyway, YU versus other colleges. One of the major advantages of YU is the network that's established. A lot of people who are in the workplace, they said it's such an opportunity through the network that they can do, being people you're in YU with, or even as a fellow YU alum. So I don't know, other than they have a different opinion, I wouldn't like run after like a huge, broad networking. I would just kind of build up your network and build up relationships and kind of go naturally. And that, I think, answers your question as well. Like, yeah, you start small, but you can get very far through those relationships.
Yeah, I would say the exact same thing, which is that I don't think in terms of broad networking. You can think of it, the mashal I would give is like, you can join LinkedIn and be part of a network of 2 billion people, but the real relationships are in the DMs or whatever. You can think of it in those terms. I don't one by one conversation at a time, one coffee at a time, one WhatsApp chat at a time, one introduction at a time. It's not a numbers game. It's just a relationship, and it compounds over time. I totally would agree with that. That was one question. What was the other question about Aliyah? I would also say in terms of that, same thing. I would say is that there is nobody in this room, almost I would say with virtual certainty, that doesn't have any connection in Israel. No, that's the point. The point is that you have to have a little bit of chutzpah and a little bit of like reaching out, just cold, hey, I got your number from so-and-so. And there's ways to do it, right? There's like a little bit of you can't just, blast your CV and, hey, find me a job to 1 million people.
No long voice host to strangers, please.
Exactly. Whatever, there's rules of engagement, but if you want to make a general connection with somebody, it doesn't mean you're going to, bat 1,000. It doesn't mean you're going to, get a job on your second try. But building real relationships is one at a time, and at this point, the critical mass of Klal Yisrael is in Eretz Yisrael, and there's plenty of opportunities here. There's plenty of people at all levels. You would be absolutely shocked, of people who run big companies, people who are doing big things. They're accessible. They're available, and if they're not available directly, they're available 1 or 2 degrees, and so you can reach out to people big and small, and don't just one at a time.
Yeah, I'm not a natural networker. Networking for me takes intention and sort of forcing myself to do it. I'm speaking having come from a 2-day conference and going back there after this session and going to these big networking events. I agree with what's been said here. I don't find them to be super productive. The best thing you can do at these types of big events is to sort of, go with somebody you know, or through somebody you know, and have them introduce you to some other people, and then you can broaden out from there. But start small and broaden out if you wanted to go that route. So that's just my thoughts on the big networking events. I've not had great success at those types of things, and I don't really enjoy them, quite frankly. But I force myself to do them sort of as a challenge, and because for that 1 in a million chance that maybe something good will happen. But more to your point about Aliyah, and to what Zevi mentioned, I've never turned someone down if they've come to me and said, "Can I talk to you about what you do? Can I ask you for some advice?" Yeah, I probably wouldn't appreciate a formal voice note about that. But if someone reaches out, I got your number from so and so, or I found you on LinkedIn, or whatever it is. Do you have a few minutes to speak? I've never said no. In fact, it's flattering. Someone wants to hear about what I've been through. They want my advice. Of course, I'm happy to share and make any connections that I can. So if sort of, I think about it this way. Like I also am by nature more introverted. I would find I would have a harder time just reaching out to someone cold and say, "Can I talk to you?" But I think about it from the opposite perspective, right? If someone reached out to me, what would be my reaction? My reaction would be absolutely no problem. So I'm assuming that most people would react the same way. Maybe not everybody, but most people would react the same way. So if you have that mindset and take that next step to feel confident to go and reach out to people, you can build your network very effectively that way.
All right. Thank you guys so much to our first segment, our panelists. Round of applause. So in part 2 of this conversation, we have my friend Shaun Regenbaum. Shaun and I go way back to Camp Sports together. I do want to give a shout out to NCSY Camp Sports, a place where I spent 5 summers and had a very, very big influence on me. So I'm glad to be able to give them a shout out here on the podcast. So Shaun is a PhD candidate from Hebrew University in bioengineering. He has worked on lab-grown meat, dozens of pharmaceutical drugs, and more. Today, he's the founder and CEO of Profex, that's with an X at the end, which runs one of the world's largest autonomous labs simulating clinical trial outcomes to trade them on the stock market. I don't know how that works. Maybe we'll get to that in a few minutes. So Shaun, welcome and thank you for coming today.
Thank you for having me.
So the theme today is new beginnings, transitions. So maybe let's start with your transition story to Israel, founding a company. Take us through that beginning of that journey.
So I know classic journey always starts in Yeshiva. So I went to Ma'ale Adumim for Yeshiva, a little bit of a different place, Israeli. I fell in love with there. And so I always knew I was coming back to Israel. But after Yeshiva, I went to Georgia Tech. It was the only religious Jew there when I was there. I have a whole bunch of fun stories. I had to threaten to sue to get out of the meal plan. They wanted me to pay. But we can go into some stories there if you like.
Do the time allowed.
When I was at Georgia Tech, I did a lot of research in different places. I started my first company there. And when I made Aliyah, I was kind of expecting to, I don't know, I didn't know what I was going to do exactly. I was still running that company at the time. And when I came here, that was when my first company got acquired by an Israeli pharma company. And I've been here ever since. So I can go into more details depending on how you want to go.
Yeah, so I guess you started as a founder even before you're out of school. So we had a question about it before. We can pick up on that right now. You're in school, so I'm assuming it's usually a time where people are getting ready and learning, and then afterwards I'll start my first role, and then afterwards I'll start my career. But you didn't wait. So what was it that drew you to start a company in college?
Yeah, so for me it was out of necessity more than anything else. When I was at Georgia Tech, I grew up in Atlanta, and so Georgia Tech is an in-state college for me. In order to make sure I went there for free, I needed to keep up a certain GPA. I needed a 3.3. And I'm not a very good student by the fact that I don't go to class. And so it's kind of hard to keep up a 3.3 if you don't go to class. But luckily, I found a hack, which is Georgia Tech is a research institute. And if you do research for credit hours, let's say I get a C in my biology class, I can get an A in my research. If it's both 4 credit hours, that averages out to a B. And so when I was there, for every class I also did research credit. And therefore, I didn't ever go to class. And so when I was doing that, I worked for a number of labs, and I talked to a lot of professors. And I started seeing some patterns of what these labs needed. And at the time, they were all talking about bioinformatics software. And so I was doing the same exact thing for pretty much all of them. And I thought, hey, why don't I just sell this to them instead of doing this whole research hack thing? And so that's what I started doing. I started selling it to Georgia Tech labs and Hebrew University labs and eventually across the world. And it was essentially just taking what I was already doing that I knew that there was a need for and kind of formalizing it, and also eventually led to the acquisition. So that's how that story started. But yeah.
And so you're already managing different roles, responsibilities, and also a schedule that demands different things of you, different values, as you alluded to before. Maybe take us through, you could share some stories, some anecdotes, and some insights into navigating both practically time, energy, focus as an entrepreneur, as a student, but also values as a religious student, founder in a campus that's not necessarily ready for that. So happy to hear some of those experiences.
Yeah. So when I went into Georgia Tech, I obviously knew that it was going to be quite a different environment than others. So I went in, trying to go in with a schedule of learning, et cetera. And some of the most fun things that I did there came out of that. So I remember, I used to be on campus and I wanted a quiet place to learn. And there was always a competition to find the nooks and crannies of places in the center of campus. But I wanted like a makom kvua. I wanted a established place. And so I had the bright idea of trying to start a lab because I know labs are given rooms, and therefore a room means I can have a space to learn. And so I went to, there's a lab at Georgia Tech called DILAC, which is like digital humanities. There's not much humanities at Georgia Tech, but they managed to make one called digital humanities. And I went to them and I pitched this idea that Sefaria, a very common Jewish tool, doesn't have tzurat hadaf. It doesn't have the layout of the daf on its page. It just has, you go through line or section by section. And I went to them and I said, hey, if you give me a little place, a little room, I'll make tzurat hadaf and we'll write a research paper on it and it'll be great. And I managed to convince the head of that lab that this was a great idea. I also got Sefaria to fund it. And therefore I made a Talmud lab in the middle of Georgia Tech with no Jews. And that gave me a place to learn. And so it was a very good little experience there. Highly recommend it. It might be harder at YU, but that was kind of, I saw something I wanted and I just kept on knocking on doors until it happened. And that's kind of true throughout everything, which is you have a vision of what you want, a real physical vision. You imagine, in X years, I want to be somewhere or I'm really missing something. You just have to take whatever you're dreaming of and say, okay, what are the steps required to get it? And so if you say, I want a Beit Midrash in the middle of Georgia Tech, it's very unlikely. But if you view it as a kind of couple of steps where, okay, I just need a room, and that's the first step, well, it becomes a lot easier. And so, this is true with all things where I wanted chavrutas. The only problem was that there weren't many religious Jews. So I managed to find some chavrutas in the Atlanta community, but I used to drive every day to the local community for Shachrit. And eventually there were some Panamanian Jews who, used to go to Chabad. And they're not really religious, but they were very traditional. And they wanted, they liked me and they were like, okay, great. Can you pick us up? And so for, 3 years, I kept on driving them with me to shul. And eventually they wanted to learn Gemara. And so I started teaching Gemara. And heck, now one of them lives in Mea Sharim with 3 kids. And so, I didn't have any chavrutas to start, but, you make them. And those kind of are the themes of my experience at Georgia Tech was, which is I knew what I wanted. And you have to just keep on going and making a situation. And even if it's not there for the next 6 months, well, what are the steps required, before the 6 months to get to where you want? And
so, there are a lot of stigmas around being an entrepreneur or sort of stereotypes, maybe a better word. So which of those have you found true or untrue in your journey?
Yeah. So first of all, I see a lot of people recommend being an entrepreneur. It's something you should go for. And maybe this is unpopular, but I don't recommend everyone do it. It's a lot harder than people think. It's a lot lonelier than people think. There's very few people who have the experience required to advise you, and finding those advisors is very hard. And while success and money and all that stuff can influence you for a certain amount of time to keep going, it becomes really, really, really hard if you don't truly believe in what you're trying to build and what you're trying to make. And so, maybe the first stigma is it's hard, but I don't think it's stigmatized enough. It's much harder than you think. That's maybe the first thing. And maybe it's not a nice way to say it, but I think it is really, really true. The second thing is also, maybe the opposite of it, which is it's also easier. You don't need permission from anybody. The only thing you need is the desire to do it and like an inability to accept failure. If you just keep on going, you'll eventually get to where you want or something that looks awfully similar to it. And every time something fails, it really, really hurts and breaks you down inside. But if you just keep going, eventually you become a little immune to the failure and you find new opportunities. And so, just in general, when, for example, raising money, the classical thing, if you want to do VC, people don't necessarily say it so much. The average time it takes to get your first yes is about 60 no's. And that's a nice number, but most people don't realize what it means to get, told no to 60 times. You go into a meeting and you sit there for an hour saying what you want to do. And, they tell you 3 weeks later, it's not such a great fit. And you do it again, and then you do it again, and you do it again. You do that 60 times in a row. And it's really, really hard for your confidence and for your ego. And so, there's only two kind of founders that I've ever met. One is with, an excess of ego where every single time they say no, they have so much ego, it doesn't really matter. And the other one is someone who, has really gotten rid of their ego and realized that the no's don't really mean anything to them. They have something else they're going for. And so, the second set is a little bit more quiet. The first set usually tends to be a louder kind of person. But those are the kind of personalities you need to be able to get through it.
So you're studying for your PhD now, and there is somewhat of a thought process which says, this classic college track to get an undergrad, a master's, and a PhD is the old school way, and the entrepreneurial way, and the drop out of college and make $1 million on my own is the other way of doing it. But you're doing both. you're on both tracks. So how do those two pieces fit together?
So yeah, the reason I'm doing a PhD, and it's not really most of my time, it's about 1 day a week max, but is actually opposite of the normal track. So first of all, when I told my parents I was doing a PhD, they didn't believe me for 2 months straight until I literally gave them a form from the university that said I was in their PhD program. That's how much I didn't like my undergraduate degree. But when my company got acquired and I was working at this Israeli pharma company, I would go into meetings and I would sit down and everyone around the table would introduce themselves and they'd go, "Hi, I'm Dr. Wolf. I'm Dr. Stein. I'm Dr. Whatever, Dr. Muhammad." Go around the room and then I would just sit there and be like, "Hi, I'm Shaun." And it happened again and again. And you could see that without that doctor, without that degree, it was very hard to convince people. And this is especially or specifically true, I'd say, in biotech. I do think that's a lot less true in other fields. So software, I don't even think that's true. And perhaps, advanced degrees might be a waste of time depending on what you're trying to do. But in biotech, it's a very old school field. And without that PhD, it's very hard to convince specifically pharma companies that what you're saying is worth listening to.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned before this project that now has been going for a few years. I didn't realize it's that old, about creating a Talmud, which is Sur Sadaf, which I've understood from some very smart people is actually a very big technical challenge. So I want you to tell us a little bit more about that project, how it's progressed, and then maybe more broadly, this current moment of Torah and AI and technology, how you view it, being someone who comes from a yeshiva background, is involved and really understands the technology at a level that I think many people don't. How do you sort of view the next few years in this space?
Yeah, so maybe it takes a little bit of understanding, the rest of my life. So, I indirectly manage, dozens of people at this point. And when you get into a role of a manager and you get into a later stage of a company, you have a lot less time to do the things that you really got into it for. I really like programming, and I really like making things, and I really like dreaming big and implementing those things. But, day to day, I don't get to do those things as much anymore. And so when you want to talk about balance is a hard thing because there's many, many things you want to balance. So, I think Michael Eisenberg was meant to be here, and he's very fond of saying there's no such thing as work-life balance. There's just, what you want to do. And while there's a lot of truth to that, especially for entrepreneurs and people like him, I think I very much disagree. There's competing interests in your life always. And if you don't make the time for them, one of them will inevitably consume the others. And so if I just never made time for other things, I would be entirely focused on meetings and meetings and meetings and meetings and everything else would kind of lay by the wayside. And so it was very important to me very early on to make time for other things. And one of these things was side projects. And so, very early on when I was working on the Tzur Tataf thing, I used that to help me make a Zman Kvua for learning, because it's very hard to make a digital Gemara without actually learning Gemara a little bit too. And so I don't know if anybody knows, but it's really not a popular thing. It's a side project of mine, Talmud.dev, if you want to look at it. But what it does is it takes this layout engine and it takes everything from Safari and other places and makes the actual daf, but it makes it interactive. So you can click on a rabbi and see visually, where they were on the map, and you can see where they traveled to throughout their life, and likely when they're saying their opinion in the Gemara, where were they at the time? You can see like a map of the arguments and that type of thing. It helps me learn personally, and so it's something that I make time for because it's very, very hands-on. This isn't anybody else's thing. It gives me time to build something, and it keeps my builder skill set fresh, which is very important. And these things always plays into each other. Whatever I do there helps me in my own, career as well, because if I want to talk to my developers, I need to understand, and remember vividly what are the things that they're working on. And same with biology. You need to do the experiments once in a while to remember what the problems that they're trying to deal with are. And so when it comes to balance, I do think it's very important to not let anything consume you, because it makes you lose touch with all the other things that are going on. And you can only make the best decisions you can when you have enough, fingers and enough pies, and you really feel that you're in touch with the people you're dealing with.
Amazing. This is a great conversation, Shaun. Thank you. And I think it's a good time to open up audience and questions.
It's a little different saying, but it's a little on the culture side of things. But it's about army, and we talked a lot before in the last panel about how people find it very important that if you're entering a job force, it's very important in Israel that you've done army. And basically, all of us here have not done army. And for us, the one make aliyah, would you recommend that we do some type of service to kind of like join this culture, or is it something you had about to be such an issue?
I just want to jump in here and say that I don't like this question. 2 weeks ago, we had Ami Younger say that protecting this country has been the biggest privilege of his life. In my opinion, serving in the IDF is holy, it's a duty, and it's a privilege. Those are the primary things to discuss when it comes to Army, not whether it will help your resume or land that first job.
Was there anything that really surprised you or anything you didn't expect going from such an Israeli area like Mala Adumim to Georgia Tech?
What do you think the state of technology in Torah is?
There's a question about doing Army to become more culturally relevant, for lack of a better word. We had a question about going from Mala Adumim, Israeli, to Georgia Tech, American, back to Israel, back and forth culturally, and then the state of technology in Torah as Shaun sees it nowadays.
So in regards to the Army, anyone who says that anything is...
Sorry, you did Army?
I haven't done Army.
Okay.
So anyone who says that, Army is a requirement to do anything, that's not true. Nothing is a requirement. Like I said, you don't need permission as long as you are, have enough confidence and just keep going. Eventually you'll get to where you want to. But there's a reason I didn't do Army. So if I was going to do it, I was going to do it Hesder with my friends Yeshiva. And so when I came back to Georgia Tech, I was older, et cetera. And I talked to a lot of my friends and they all recommended that I don't do the Army. Everyone that I was with. And that might have been personal advice. I would not have been the best rule listener, perhaps. But while there are regrets and things that I miss out on for sure, you see it and you hear it. And when I do interviews for people, the first thing they bring up is where they were in the Army. And even the lack of me understanding, the minutiae and details of what that means is, perhaps something interesting from the flip side. But it's more of a cultural thing. It's just something to talk about. And if you can find other things to talk about, that's all you need. It's about connecting to people. The Army beyond that isn't much. Most of the time, 70, 80% of the time you're spent in the Army, perhaps even more, is spent doing shmirah, doing nothing. And so not that it's not important. You sit there for the 1% of time where things do happen. But, you have to look at it as a cost benefit. What do you want to do with your time? And is the Army worth it? I highly recommend for most people, yeah, it probably is. Having that thing to talk about can be very, very valuable, but it's not required. And so don't let people bully you into thinking that it is.
We had a question about the cultural differences between Israel to America and back.
There was obviously a massive cultural difference. Going from yeshiva where there's no grades, or at least in Maladim, there's no grades, to a place where all everyone cares about is grades is a very big shift. And I found that people were in general less mature than what I wanted, for my friend group, et cetera. And so I found it a hard time to really connect to people because we were just in very different places. I felt that I was just much older than everyone else. And when they go into class, their entire goal is to get an A. It doesn't even matter the learning. That's irrelevant. Their whole goal is to get an A so they can have a high GPA so that they can get a good job. And that's the track. And so I would say that was probably the biggest cultural difference, which is, nothing matters except for this very, very minute thing in my mind, which didn't matter. And that gap made it very hard to connect to a lot of people, except for some of the very good friends that I made along there. And so I'd say it was a very, very big difference. And then Torah and AI. I mean, look, AI, we can go into the details of what the heck that actually means, but it's just like any revolution that's ever happened, agricultural, industrial, the internet. Will it have more or less of an impact? It'll probably have a similar level of impact to the internet. You ask your parents what they were doing before the internet and they kind of barely remember. It's going to be the same thing with us. You're going to ask, what was it like before AI? And you're like, I think I wrote research papers without, asking the AI to help me write them. But it's not going to get rid of the world. It's not going to get rid of jobs entirely. There's always going to be something to do because fundamentally we're building things for ourselves, and the best people that know what people want are people. And no matter how much AI learns from people, it can never know what is the next thing that people want that they've barely even begun to describe. And so, if you look at Talmud Dev, I think about this a lot because most of the content there is generated by AI. It has, hundreds of thousands of words attached to each daf that I generate. And where those words are coming from, what they're based off of, is all the context, all the Rishonim, all the, everything you can imagine that's stuffed into there. And using AI to rephrase that and to give it into new forms is extremely valuable. And it changes, I think, fundamentally a lot of how we'll learn. It makes things easier to understand. But is it going to get rid of learning? Is it going to get rid of anything like that? No, because you don't go to a shiur simply because the information was there. You go to a shiur because that person is engaging to listen to, because you care about what they have to say, because they have a personal connection, and anything that has to do with a person is not going to go away. It might change a little bit, but it's not going to go away.
When you said around the beginning.
So, like I said, Georgia Tech is a research institute. So every single professor there is doing research. And so you just talk to anyone and they have some project that they're doing. And I would say about, I don't know the exact numbers, but maybe 10 to 15% of all Georgia Tech students do research. They ask a professor and they join their lab. Maybe not multiple labs, but at least one. And so it's really just simply a matter of going to somebody that you like and saying, I don't know what project you're working on, but I want to learn about it. And most of the time, the things that people are devoting their lives to, they like talking about. And so it's not very hard to get a professor to talk about what they're doing. And so I had a goal, which was once every week or once every 2 weeks, I would talk with one professor. I would just reach out to them and say, hey, I'm interested. Let's get a coffee. And I did that. And I met, 50, 60, 70, 80 people, professors, and I learned about their research. And it gave me a pretty wide picture of what was going on, because Georgia Tech's a pretty good research institute, and anything that's popular there is popular amongst the rest of the world. And I highly recommend doing something like that. Even if you don't engage in their lab, learning about what lots of people are doing gives you, an edge or an advantage that most people don't even bother about. Breadth is really important, even to be able to use AI effectively, know the questions to ask, et cetera. And when you find something you really, really do like, at the time I found this stuff called organoid research, which is, making these mini human microtissues, like making organs in a lab. I was like, that's science fiction. And so that's where I joined, and I really wanted to do that work. And so it's definitely possible. I don't know the mechanics of each university. I don't know if you can get credit for it, but I promise you, all it takes is convincing the one person who's doing that work that they should spend time with you. Because what's the difference between them spending time with you and you doing research for them? It's the same thing. And so, if you take around the terms and you take out all the bureaucracy, you just have to spend time with the guy doing the work you want, or the girl. Yeah.
You say research, you say spending time to the 80 professors that you met with. Did you write down stuff, or were you just shadowing them? So
when I met with them, I literally went to go get coffee with them, and I offered to buy coffee. Like, that was my thing. I would offer to buy them coffee. Usually they'd pay for my coffee in the end, but that's fine. And I would literally just ask them. I would read a paper of theirs. Usually it's something that they wrote beforehand, and that would be the starting point. And I would just ask them, like, how did you get to this? Why are you doing this? What do you care about? Most of the time, the way that people write things and talk about things online that you read, it's kind of held back, especially in the academic world. They make, very specific claims, but the real reason they're doing something is much grander. And it takes kind of a little bit of yanking to understand that. And so, when I would talk with some physics professor who's doing graphite nanotubes, it sounds boring. What the heck is a graphite nanotube, and why should I care? When you say, why are you actually working on this? Like, what's the real reason? They would either, start telling stories about what inspired them, but also they'd be like, well, do you not want free energy? And that's way cooler than graphite nanotubes. And so, doing that again and again, first of all, it's a very valuable skill of getting information out of people, that they want to talk about, but, they feel maybe that they shouldn't. But second of all, it really helps you understand truly what people want, because no matter who you're talking to, when you sit down with them, they have a whole inner state of mind of things that they want and things that they're dreaming about and all this stuff. And you don't necessarily know going into it what it is. But the ability to really quickly converge and understand from their perspective, what are their goals, and say, okay, what do I want that also is what they want? That'll get you way, unimaginably far, just aligning yourself with what the other person sitting across from you wants. And so that's the skill. And so I didn't write much down. I wrote some papers later, but I didn't write anything from those meetings, because the goal was not, information. It was connecting with them, understanding them before I got anything else out of it.
Okay, so we're out of time. We're going to end up with our quick rapid fire round, which we do at the end of our episodes. 3 short questions, 3 hopefully short answers. We're in the summer. We have nice long Shabbat afternoons. What do you like to do at that time?
I mean, in generally, I hate to admit it, but oftentimes I'm sleeping.
Nothing wrong with that.
So got to catch up on sleep. But no, I have a couple of chavrut on Shabbat that I very much enjoy.
Okay, do you have a favorite sefer on Parshat Shavua that you go to time and again?
Like I said, I do the Talmud Dev stuff, so I actually make my own little thing with Tanakh, and that's how I learn. And it kind of blends, it takes the midrash and makes its own perush out of it. And so that's what I learned. There's no name for it because it's online. But if I had to choose them, Rabbi Sachs is the classic. He always has good stuff.
Right. And finally, if you were forced to leave all of the current projects you're doing, find some new industry, some new job, maybe something you dreamed of doing as a kid, what would that be?
I mean, I am doing what I dreamed of as a kid, or maybe not exactly, but definitely interests me. I remember when I was at Camp Sports, I had like two visions of like where I wanted to go in life. I was either going to be like a great rabbi, or I was going to, do cool research and stuff I wanted to do. And so if I, went back all the way, I might explore the other path. I think I could be a pretty good rabbi.
All right, Shaun, thank you so much.
No.
Thank you guys.